Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mark Farzy. This is the Farzy Show, presented by Steven Singer. Steven Singer, Joel, it's lovely to have you along for the ride here. Oh, boy, do we have a good guest for you today. Keith Pompey of Inquirer.com, who just dropped a little bit of information last night. In case you missed it, Keith Pompey, Inquirer.com, Sixers beat writer, put out this tweet that linked to an article about the 76ers receiving calls for Tobias Harris. Now, there's been a lot of speculation, but I feel like in today's day and age, too many people look at speculation as if it's a report, and it's not. This is a report. The Pistons, Cavs, Pacers are all apparently knocking on the Sixers' door, asking about Tobias Harris trade availability. If you click on his Twitter there, it takes you to this article right now where the Sixers make a trade during the NBA draft, which is tonight. Tobias Harris's market, James Harden's decision, and so much more from Keith Pompey. This is a fascinating article because it covers so many different things. One of the things it covers is Nick Nurse and what he's going to do with Joel Embiid and James Harden and the impact there of Nick Nurse being hired and what that means for James Harden, as well as the flirtation with James Harden going back to Houston potentially, and Houston kind of being, I'm not so sure about it. And James Harden be like, I wasn't even that interested anyway. And then going back to his former lover, which is now the 76ers in this case, instead of his former lover, which is the Houston Rockets. So it's a triangle, folks. That's what we're trying to follow right now when it comes to James Harden and his future. Here's the prediction. And we've gotten into this over the last couple of shows, but officially this is what I'm predicting now. James Harden is back with the 76ers. James Harden is back with the 76ers on some semblance of a 2-year deal. Whether that's another 1-year deal with a player option, or that's a 2-year deal with a third-year option. I don't want to see a third-year option. I just have this sneaky suspicion that he's going to sign a 2-year deal to stay here in Philadelphia for close to max money, and then he's going to have an option after that. I hope that's not the case. I think that's the farthest that the Sixers are willing to go with James Harden, with a 2-year deal and then potentially a third-year player option. I could see that happening. Bottom line is, if I'm being held down, being asked what is going to happen, I'll use the phrase that our friend Austin Krell used the other day, wood or gun to the head. I'm saying that James Harden signs a 1-year deal with a player option. And that player option will be pretty close to max money. So I think we're going to have at least another 2 years, at least one more year of James Harden here in Philadelphia. That's where I'm at on the whole situation. After reading Keith Pompey's article, after talking to Keith Pompey, and we'll play that interview for you in a second. If you didn't catch it last night, we actually went live last night because Keith had just dropped the story, so I wanted to make sure we got it out there as soon as possible. We'll re-air that today during today's program. So we'll get into that whole conversation and what this could mean for Tobias Harris, because the Sixers could just be really interested in what Tobias Harris could be under Nick Nurse. Under Doc Rivers, we saw Tobias Harris kind of disappear. We did not see him be worth anything close to the contract that he is getting right now. He has looked the worst version of Tobias Harris in his career has been with James Harden, Joel Embiid. Since he has been a player, since he has been a marquee name in the NBA, he has taken huge steps back in terms of production. Now, is that because all of a sudden he sucks? No, I don't think that's it at all. It's because you have a ball-dominant guard. It's because you have a ball-dominant center. And those two just getting enough touches is pretty hard. And now you've also thrown in Tyrese Maxey into the mix. So it's not a matter of, I think, diminishing skills from Tobias Harris. It's more of a diminished role from Tobias Harris. I would love to see the guy that came over here from the LA Clippers, and we've been talking about those numbers for years. Can he get back to those numbers? I don't think so, even with Nick Nurse. But here's what I do know that Nick Nurse is going to do. Nick Nurse is going to have a lot of ball movement in this offense. A lot of players are going to touch that basketball, and that's going to lead to a lot more diversity in scoring. Now, is James Harden going to be on board for that? Well, we'll have to see. And if he's staying here in Philadelphia, I'm going to go ahead and assume that he is on board for that. Is Joel Embiid going to be more of a facilitator? Or if he's at the elbow, if he's at the foul line, if he's on the block, if he's on the perimeter, is he going to be looking for guys that are moving around him? Because what it seemed like more often than not with Joel Embiid in this offense was that he was the offense. James Harden assisted Joel Embiid, 2 points or foul shots, whatever it might be. That's how you got your points. James Harden step back three, James Harden blow by, he goes to the line. That's how you got a lot of your points. Is that going to change where instead of Joel Embiid turning and facing the basket, is he still going to have his back to the basket on a couple of occasions, looking to set up a cutting Tobias Harris coming from the opposite side of the floor, a cutting Tyrese Maxey? What is it going to look like? Cutting James Harden, a little give and go? More pick and roll? What are we going to see in the Nick Nurse offense? Defensively speaking, there's a lot of questions because James Harden is not exactly the NBA's most, the NBA is a defensive player of the year. He's not flirting with that award anytime soon. He's not getting any younger in order to have the energy to run around on the floor as much as he has in the past. So I don't know what that looks like. I'd like to see what it looks like with Tyrese Maxey, certainly. I'd like to see what it looks like with Tobias Harris. I have said for the entire offseason that I don't want James Harden back. I want to see what Nick Nurse does with Maxey, with Tobias Harris, with Joel Embiid in this very popular phrase, gap year now with the Sixers. It doesn't appear to be the way the Sixers are headed. It doesn't appear to be where they're headed at all. So we'll get some more details on this from Keith Pompey coming up in just a second. The Phillies did get rained out last night. A couple of things. One, for the fans. Does it really take that long to call a game? 2+ hours? Does it really take that long to call a game against a divisional opponent where you're playing before the All-Star break? You're playing them again, right? You got to go there and they got to come here again. You know that, right? Like, it shouldn't take that long. But yet, there's a lot of factors. I don't know if there's concerts at either stadium. I don't know what the hell's going on. But it's going to be made up as part of a day-night doubleheader on September 11th. Phillies are going to make up yesterday's game. Phillies are supposed to still have Aaron Nola on the hill today when they get things underway at 1:05 this afternoon. But it looks like rain for the next 4 days. I think today we're supposed to have showers in the Philadelphia area. And then after that, thunderstorms. So I don't know if they get this game in today. Hopefully they do. I'd like to see the Phillies play today. I would like to watch the Phillies play baseball today. My first thought when I saw that the game was postponed in terms of like just delayed, I should say delayed, when the game was delayed. My first thought was, if this gets rained out, this will be a 2-game series with the Atlanta Braves now. That really sucks because I was looking forward to 3 games against the Braves and Phillies being a measuring stick. In that first game, other than Ranger Suarez, there wasn't a lot to measure up to against the Atlanta Braves. There wasn't a lot offensively speaking from this team. There wasn't a lot outside of what you saw from Ranger Suarez and his 6 innings of work. They left a lot to be desired. If this was supposed to be a measuring stick series, well, then you're missing out on a huge game. You might be missing out on another huge game today. And that's greatly disappointing. But with the way they played game 1, especially on the offensive side of things, what jumped to mind was they're not going to be going out of this series with anything that is a huge worry moving forward. I wanted some comfort. I didn't want any worry. And if they only play 1 game in this series, well, then I'm not going to be that bothered. I'll only be bothered at the fact that you didn't see more of it. But Aaron Nola is supposed to be on the hill today, this afternoon for the Phillies. And if anybody needs a get-right type series, a get-right start, it's Aaron Nola. And doing that against an opponent like the Atlanta Braves, a team with the most home runs in baseball, that would be a good start, I would say, for Aaron Nola to go out there against the Atlanta Braves and actually deal and show some ace-quality stuff that we haven't seen in quite some time for Aaron Nola. So we'll get into that conversation a little bit more in the morning rush when we basically set the schedule. And then there's a couple of questions. I've been doing a lot of guest hits on various podcasts and semi-regularly on Fox 29 and all that. And people are always asking about the Eagles, as you would assume. Birds 365, which follows this show at 9 o'clock at 8 o'clock on the Jacob Media YouTube channel with Jody Mack and Johnny Mack. They asked me a question about the most underrated member of the Eagles. Who's the most underrated member of the Eagles? And my answer, because I feel like everybody has gotten their just due, I think Jody McDonald's most underrated Eagle was Avonte Maddox. And I feel like, especially after watching Josiah Scott last year, we really value Avonte Maddox. I feel like we have missed Avonte Maddox enough due to injury where we really do appreciate Avonte Maddox now. He's not the under-the-radar guy anymore. He's not, oh, well, they got this good, nickel corner out there that's, oh, he's good. No, it's we understand that it's a three-man show when you talk about the Eagles starting cornerbacks in Avonte Maddox, James Bradbury, and Darius Slay. You mentioned him and those same names. So I feel like he is valued well. I don't think he's undervalued. I don't think he's underrated. I think he's appropriately rated as a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. The name I went with, and I said this I think last week, Reed Blankenship. Because you don't know a lot about Reed Blankenship. You have 1 year of experience with Reed Blankenship. But the safety position, even with Reed Blankenship, is an interesting conundrum for the Philadelphia Eagles. You could look at every position group, and the one that you have the most questions about, even more so than linebacker, which is hard to say when you're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles. You could look at the safety position of the Eagles and say that there are the most questions surrounding that unit than any other unit. You're pretty solid at corner, the three names I just mentioned. You're pretty solid on the defensive line. I mean, certainly you want to see if these if rookies can step up for you. Nolan Smith being one of them, Jalen Carter being another. You want to see if they can step up and help you out. But you have veterans still on the defensive line, guys like Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox, of course. But when it comes to Milton Williams, even, who gets lost in the shuffle. But when it comes to the secondary position, you might have a rookie starting out next to what will be a second-year player in Reed Blankenship. That's a bit of a concern. It's an unknown. And when you have an unknown, it is certainly a concern. Now, on the defensive line, you can rely on those veterans. You can rely on those veterans to hopefully help those rookies along, and they're right there next to them on the field. When you're in the safety position, you're on your own island, man. Are you going to be looking at Sidney Brown as the starting safety of this Eagles unit next to Reed Blankenship? Because I think the one job that is sewn up is Reed Blankenship. Are you going to be looking at Terrell Edmonds as your starting safety? Justin Evans? A guy everyone forgets about, Kayvon Wallace? What are you going to do? You're about a month away from training camp getting underway at the NovaCare Complex. July 25th. They're pretty set at the wide receiver spots. I know they're going to be a battle for the number 3 man, whoever the number 3 wide receiver is going to be. Tight ends, you're pretty set. Dallas Goedert, please stay healthy. Running back room, pretty set. Pretty set. O-line, do I even need to say it out loud? I mean, there'll be a position battle, quote unquote, for the right guard position. But other than that, I mean, you're looking at the safeties as your biggest question mark on this team. And although I think Reed Blankenship's going to be a solid player, and I think some people overlook him, I think he's got phenomenal instincts at the safety position. I feel like the 5 years he spent in college, which is usually a knock against a player, is actually a huge compliment to him because he plays with great maturity. Everything you would want to see out of a 5-year player in college, a 5-year starter in college, you saw at the NFL level last year. He gets the spot start when Chauncey Gardner-Johnson goes down. He goes out there and what does he do? Oh, he picks off Aaron Rodgers. Not a bad start, young fella. Has a couple of big hits on Saquon Barkley against the Giants in a couple of games, including the playoffs. He showed he belonged. When you're a young player, when you're a rookie, show you belong. Show you're not in over your head. And he certainly did that last year. So when you go into training camp, and we'll be looking at this in the month leading up to training camp, we'll look at the safety positions as close as we can. We'll talk about Justin Evans. We'll talk about Terrell Edmonds. We'll certainly talk about Sidney Brown because I think the Eagles right now are in a position where they're rooting for Sidney Brown to take those reins as a starter, as a rookie. And, man, that would make Howie Roseman look even smarter, right? Oh, look at this. Oh, we just plucked this rookie out. Oh, look who's going to be starting for us. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure, young. Yeah, inexperienced. Safeties. Playing for this Eagles secondary, yeah, it's a little bit of a concern. But if they show that they could really take the reins and go with it, like Sidney Brown could at training camp, well, I'm going to be really interested to see how they're willing to trust a safety that has 1 year of experience under his belt and a rookie. I'm looking forward to seeing how Sean Desai and Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman trust those safety positions. After that, yes, it is right guard because what still has me thrown through a loop is Lane Johnson talking about Tyler Steen and talking about Cam Jurgens as if there is this battle at the right guard spot. And one of the things that has come up is that, if you're betting money, Cam Jurgens is your starting right guard. But if you don't like Cam Jurgens as your starting right guard, if you want to simply hold him back to only watch Jason Kelce from the sidelines and then only want him to be your center moving forward, say if Jason Kelce does retire after this year, well, then why would you want him to get used to a different position? Why wouldn't you want Tyler Steen, who you drafted to be a guard, already start to get settled in for the long term in that right guard position? It's an interesting argument. I still think what the Eagles are going to err on the side of is the best player, not worry about next year until next year. And I think the reason they can afford to do that is because Cam Jurgens has already dedicated himself to some versatility. Where as a center, he has already taken some snaps at the right guard spot in walkthroughs just to get his feet wet so he understands the playbook. If that's what he's willing to do in a year where he's not going to be playing guard, meaning last year, his rookie season, well, then what is he going to do in a year where he can really attack the position? I think he can play center tomorrow. If he can learn this right guard spot, and by all accounts, he's having no big issue doing that because he did put in the work last year to already understand the position, understand the flow of the position, understand what it's like to play next to Lane Johnson on his right as opposed to being sandwiched between two guards. So that, for me, is a big step for a guy like Cam Jurgens. That's a huge thing going into now his second year in the NFL. So safety positions for the Eagles we'll certainly be talking about in the upcoming month, who you feel most comfortable with and who will be jumping out of the pack when training camp does start. And then the right guard spot, we'll figure that out as time goes on. But there's a couple of questions that have been thrown my way during various guest appearances that people will ask me about the Eagles. And for me, I go to safety and I go to the right guard spot. Those are two spots right now that you have some questions about. And as time goes on, we will get the answers to that. Before we get to Keith Pompey, let me tell you about the man, Steven Singer, at Steven Singer Jewelers, the other corner of 8th and Walnut, right there on Jewelers Row. For over 40 years, Steven's been in the love business in Philadelphia, helping people get engaged and fall in love. Steven Singer Jewelers, one place, one price, home of the perfect price, each and every day, online at IHateStevenSinger.com. That's IHateStevenSinger.com. Now, what does Steven give us? That perfect price, which means you don't have to worry about negotiating or haggling or anything like that. All you got to do is worry about what beautiful piece of diamond jewelry you want to buy at the other corner of 8th and Walnut. Steven Singer Jewelers, online at IHateStevenSinger.com. Always fast and free shipping at IHateStevenSinger.com. Without further ado, let's jump on the Rothman Orthopedics guest line. Talk to our friend Keith Pompey of Inquirer.com about all things Sixers and possibly Tobias Harris draft day trades. Welcome into a special edition of the Farzy Show. We had some breaking news from the Philadelphia Inquirer, most notably Keith Pompey. Make sure you guys are following Keith Pompey in the Twitterverse and all social media as well. Keith just dropped a story on Inquirer.com that you should all check out about the Pistons, the Cavaliers, and the Indiana Pacers having interest in Sixers forward Tobias Harris. You guys can go to Inquirer.com and check out the rest of this story. And joining us right now is Mr. Keith Pompey. Keith, how are you, man?
What's good, man? How you been?
I've been fantastic. Thanks for joining us, man. I appreciate it. Now, this stuff about Tobias Harris, when did all this stuff start to really kick up? When have teams started calling about Tobias Harris and potentially making a trade?
Teams have been kicking up. I shouldn't say teams have been like acquiring about Tobias from what I'm hearing, like recent, like a couple weeks now. I want to say like 2 weeks ago. Now here's the thing. This is nothing new, right? And what I mean by that is the last couple years during the trade deadline and then like during the season, the Sixers have been seeing what was out there for Tobias, but it just seems like right now there's a couple of teams, the Detroit, for instance, the Cavs and Indiana that really are looking to add veteran depth and adding Tobias leadership to their team. So those are the three teams.
Now, one of the things that you point out in the article is a phrase, outrageous returns, outrageous packages in returns. That's what Daryl Morey and the 76ers are looking for. What do you think is realistic about a return when it comes to Tobias Harris?
It's weird. Like, I mean, to me, it's kind of like it depends on. And if I'm Daryl Morey, I get it. Like, you don't want to mess up your team, right? But like, let's just say if you can get Buddy Hield for Tobias Harris and maybe add another player in the mix to match that salary, I think that will work out well, and I think that will be something that both teams would really love to have. You know what I mean? Like, really, I mean, the Sixers could use a Buddy Hield on their team.
This makes me think of moving on from Ben Simmons, and I remember the draft night where there was a chance the Sixers could move on from Ben Simmons. There was conversation about the San Antonio Spurs, and apparently Daryl Morey's ask was 5 first-round picks, and it was something crazy like that. Is that the type of outrageous things we're talking about, but more on a Tobias Harris level?
Yeah, more on the Tobias Harris level. It's like, I need an all-star. I need a rising all-star, like a future all-star, and I need a first-round pick. And like, some teams aren't trying to do things like that. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, the crazy part is, like, they were, when Ben Simmons, they were trying to get like rising stars from the Golden State Warriors, and you're right, and 5 first-round picks. Tobias is more or less, give us a first-round pick, but we want an all-star player in return, things like that. So, but what it is one of those things where, and I respect it, it's one of those things where I feel like Daryl Morey feels like, look, right now we don't know what we're going to do with James, right? We hope that James comes back, but at the same time, if you're going to take Tobias from us and we don't know if James is coming back, you got to give us something that we can move forward with, so where we can remain an elite team.
Are the Sixers, and you talk about this in the article, and I, again, wanted to flash it up there for people that haven't seen it yet on Inquirer.com. You talk about it in the article, how the Sixers still like Tobias Harris, and they feel like his ceiling is higher with Nick Nurse as the head coach as opposed to Doc Rivers. How much better do you think a guy like Tobias Harris will get under Nick Nurse?
You know what? Basing it off of what Nick Nurse has done, like with Toronto, we look at Pascal Siakam, you look at Chris Boucher, guys like that. A couple of years ago, you look at Pascal and you say, some people could argue that he's a better player than Tobias, right? Some people can argue that, but you didn't say that 3 years ago. And I think when you look at what Nick Nurse, how he developed those type of guys, and you can see what he can do with Tobias. I mean, we look at it. All these guys are around the same size, 6'8", 6'9". They're athletic for their position. And I feel like a guy like Tobias playing under Nick Nurse, yes, he should take a step forward. Now, again, another thing that Nick did was he had a balanced attack. And those are the type of offenses that Tobias Harris thrives under. Now, again, you got Joel, you got James, but at the same time, I could see Nick Nurse utilizing Tobias more than Doc Rivers did.
When it comes to other guys involved in this offense, like Joel Embiid, for instance, I know a lot of people are talking about the idea of him potentially being more of a facilitator under Nick Nurse. Does that mean that there's going to be a lot more movement around Joel Embiid, and is Tobias Harris expected to be a bigger part of that?
You know what? I don't. What I'm doing is right now, I'm assuming, because Nick never came out and said what he's doing. So what he's going to do, but what I'm assuming is looking at what he did when he was in Toronto. And I do feel like, because, Nick is big on ball movement. He's big on guys cutting. He's big on a lot of different things. Whereas in the past, when you looked at the Sixers, it was kind of one of those things where Tobias stayed in the corner unless one of those guys were out. I feel like if Nick Nurse implements the offense that he implemented in Toronto, those are things that I don't know what the plays are going to be like, but those are things that are better, fit more with Tobias Harris' game than what Doc Rivers did with Joel. Now, again, you have to feed the big man. That's the most important thing. But at the same time, I think that is set up for a guy like Tobias to take a lot more pressure off of Joel, to make things easier, because the movement is going to be there.
All right. Do you think Tobias Harris is going to be a 76er after Thursday night's NBA draft?
Right now I do. I mean, right now. But you never know what can happen at the 11th hour. Like, you never know if the 76ers say, hey, okay, somebody's going to offer us something that where we can replace him. You know, you don't know that now, but right now, and until they figure out James, and if the Sixers don't get something, I think Tobias has to be here. I don't think that you can trade him right now. But again, if you can get something, if you can get multiple pieces, multiple parts that can help you, again, if somebody's willing to overpay for him, yeah, I think that Tobias can get moved. But right now, I don't see it. I just don't see it.
All right, moving on to some other names that are out there. Obviously, right now, James Harden, you've mentioned him a couple of times already. Early talk was 4 years, 210 maybe million max deal, the whole thing for James Harden to return to Philly, or 200 million to go back to Houston potentially. What do you think the future holds for James Harden and the 76ers?
You know what? I'm starting. You know, a month ago, if you would have asked me this, I would have said James was definitely going to Houston. I would. And you know what? When things really changed to me was when we saw Jalen Green on Paul George's podcast. And Jalen Green was basically, well, Jalen Green was being nice, but Paul George was like, hey, man, I don't know if that's going to be a good fit for you. And then you see Jalen like nodding his head, At that point, I'm like, maybe some of the players don't want James back, right? And then after that, I talked to a source who said, hey, you know, the Sixers aren't really trying to mess up their short or long term like salary cap, right? So at that point, you're figuring like, okay, well, they're only going to give him probably 2 years. And then after that, Houston comes out, and then you're hearing from sources in Houston saying they don't want to give him a lot of years either. So at that particular point, I start believing that I think James is coming back. You know, I do. I think he's coming. As much as he says, you know, he loves Houston, they love him. I think that with all things being equal, I could see James actually coming back to Philly. I honestly think he will come back to Philly.
I got to tell you, I'm right there with you, and I certainly don't have the sources that you do, but as this has gone on, it's the same thing. A month ago, no way he's back. They're not having him back, and now it seems like almost inevitable that he's going to return here in Philadelphia. So I'll ask you this. Assuming that James Harden does come back, how much does Nick Nurse have to do with the idea that he does choose to come back to Philadelphia?
You know, you mean how much does he have to deal with it, or how much does the Nick Nurse thing impact it?
Impact it.
You know what? I think it impacts it a lot. I do. I think, but at the same time, I think that Nick Nurse is going to have, you know, a real talk with him, like, you know, and say to him, look, James, you know, you guys were better when you were more of the facilitator, and we have to go through Joel. Yes, we're going to try to, you know, make it a little bit more balanced. But I feel like, you know, that's the thing. But James wants to play more freely, right? He wants to be able to show us that he could be James Harden that had 45 points in game 1 and 42 in game 4, right? That's great. But I don't know if that type of James is going to win a championship playing alongside Joel Embiid. So I think it's going to be, yes, it's great that they have a new coach. He wasn't coming back if Doc was going to be here, right? It's great that they have a new coach. But I think it's up to Nick Nurse to have a straight up conversation with him to say, like, look, this is how we're going to win.
Okay. How much do you think this team is going to change under Nick Nurse? Will it be substantial? You talked about the ball movement before. You talked about, I know people talked about defensively, how much Nick Nurse likes to really run at players and make sure that he has a solid defense there as well. So how much will this team really be changed? Would you consider it almost an overhaul in their style of play?
You know what? I really like Nick Nurse. I do. I really like Nick Nurse as a coach. I remember one time I was walking down the hallway. It was before a game against the Sixers. I walked up to him and I said, hey, Nick, man, you know, I don't know if you really know me. I asked you a couple questions before, but I'm a big fan of you as a coach, your in-game adjustments, everything like that. With that being said, I think that close games, he'll be able to pull it out, right? But however, the one thing is, you got to be real with yourself. Like, this was a good team. If Joel Embiid continues to play like he did in big playoff games, like Game 7, if James Harden plays the way he does, I don't care if Red Auerbach is the coach. Or, I mean, seriously, I don't. Like, if your 2 stars come out and they struggle like that, you know, it's hard. I mean, you know what I mean? Like Greg Popovich, Pat Riley. I mean, like, it's hard to win a game 7 if your 2 stars struggle the way they did. So yes, Nick Nurse can help them, but I think it's up to James Harden and Joel Embiid to do the work.
I'm 100% with you there. Now, what does this mean for Tyrese Maxey? Because, I mean, I look at a guy like Pascal Siakam, and yes, I give most credit to Pascal Siakam, and the development was on his shoulders and how much better he got. But how much of that development with Tyrese Maxey can we look forward to under Nick Nurse?
Oh, I think a lot. I mean, when we look at you look at like Fred VanVleet, right? You know, who, like, this is a guy, and I'm not saying who was he, but this was a guy who was unheralded, you know, coming out of Wichita State. I mean, you look at the growth that Nick and them had with them. I mean, we're looking at it, and I know losing Sam Cassell is huge, but you look at some of the player development coaches that this team has in Toronto. You look at how Nick tries to get the best out of players. You know, Tyrese Maxey was a fringe all-star before he was injured, right? A fringe all-star before he was injured. So I expect him to take another step forward this season. And I think that when we look at this coach's track record of developing players, like, he got a lot of flack this year because he didn't really develop the young guys because he wanted to win. But if you look at his track record the other years that he was there, I think that bodes well for Tyrese Maxey's development and his role with the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nick Nurse took that heat in Toronto for not playing the younger guys and just driving the veterans into the ground, certainly. When it comes to the free agent class, which we all know isn't a lot worth bragging about right now, is there anyone out there that you see as not only likely to join the Sixers, but somebody you think would be a great fit here in Philadelphia?
You know, it's crazy because, you know, it's like when you see these names coming out, but of elite players, right? Like all-star caliber players, but there's no way in heck the Sixers can afford them, especially with, you know, this new collective bargaining and everything that they did, right? So it's kind of hard. Like, I mean, there might be some, like, I honestly, especially if James comes back, you know, unless they can trade Tobias Harris, unless they can do that, I honestly think the Sixers are going to have to hopefully get a quality pick in the second round that they can develop, right? And also probably bring their team back. I mean, because if not, you're going to be adding like minimum salary type guys, or you may be able to do this and that. But I just don't see it, man. I really don't. I don't think the Sixers have a lot of flexibility for me to go out there and say at this particular time, you can go out there and get this guy who's going to help upgrade your roster. I just see guys who can maybe fill in as rotation guys, if that. But I don't see any star quality guys because of their financial situation.
Yeah, the way I've been putting it is with the Sixers right now, Nick Nurse is your biggest free agent signing of the offseason. I mean, if they sign James Harden, then it's kind of like you're running it back, but with a different head coach. So who's the other guy that's going to come in here and really, I don't know, try to help put him over the top? And I don't think that guy is out there for the Sixers to afford. I'll put it that way.
Exactly.
Keith, looking at the draft then, looking at the Thursday night's draft, are the Sixers really going to sit this out? What's the likelihood? What are the odds that the Sixers actually make a trade somehow and get a pick somewhere, first or second round in Thursday night's draft?
You know, I think the likelihood is a strong likelihood that the Sixers could get in the second round. I think that's easy for them. I think there's going to be a lot of picks out there for them to take. You know, the thing about this draft is extremely top heavy, right? You know, we think about it, you got like 5 guys, right? And then after that, whatever, everybody's talking about it. But I think, like, you know, and I was talking to an executive, the guy said, Keith, look, the Sixers aren't, if they can get in the second round, they're not going to be that bad for this year's draft because the 23rd pick is probably going to be the same as the 37th pick. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's just so many guys that we're going to see slide and guys who move up based off of need. So I think, like, it's likely that the Sixers do grab someone. And here's the thing, and what I mean by adding depth, like, it could be someone that they pick up and they can make that person, that second round pick, a two-way player. They're going to have 3 two-way players this year in the NBA, so they can get a two-way player out of it, a guy that they could develop. You know, he's going to be cheap, and that's going to help them with the cap space.
Keith, last thing for you here, and it has to do with James Harden, has to do with Tyrese Maxey. This term, gap year, has come about now. The Sixers, if they don't bring back Harden, if they don't, you and I are both in the thought process that they will bring him back. But if they don't, I'm going to ask you this question. So let's say the Sixers do bring back Harden. What's their ceiling next year? And if the Sixers decide to have that gap year with just Tobias Harris, with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey at the helm, and, of course, Nick Nurse as well, what do you think their ceiling is then, with or without Harden, and then also with just Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid?
The thing is, I still think that the Sixers are going to have a tough time this year and next year. I mean, and why I'm saying this is I'm looking at the Boston Celtics, right? I mean, the Boston Celtics are making a lot of moves right now, right? Kristaps Porzingis, right? They're going to pick him up. Come on, man. Like, that's what they need, right? That's what they need. So you have that. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks, if they can re-sign their players, some of their players, like, they're going to be a phenomenal team again. And then, the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat, they have Jimmy Butler. That's all we have to say. So when you look at the Sixers team, it's all up to Joel Embiid and James Harden. And to me, I don't know if they're better than Milwaukee or Boston. Even with Joel and James, I don't think so. Now, but the problem is if you lose James Harden, right? When we look at this roster, you say Tyrese Maxey, phenomenal young guard, right? But what Tyrese Maxey is, he's an undersized two guard. That's what he is. He's not a point guard. So if you take James Harden off the ball, if you lose him, you're losing your best facilitator. You're losing your best ball handler. And I feel like the 76ers are going to take a step back without James Harden.
Here's where I'm at with it. I just still see them both as second round exits. One might be in a second round. They might get swept with Maxey and Embiid. The other might be another game 7, but I still just see them losing in the second round, unfortunately. Now, hopefully Nick Nurse does come in here. Hopefully he is some sort of genius that knows how to orchestrate the talent that is here already, and he'll know how to get out of that second round. Then, of course, go to the ultimate prize, which is the championship here. That's what I'll be crossing my fingers for there, Keith.
Yeah. Well, I would love to cover Eastern Conference final. I would love to do that.
I'm sure. Everyone, make sure you guys are checking out Keith's stuff on Inquirer.com. You can check out this article that's on there right now. It just dropped a couple hours ago. Make sure you guys check it out. And also follow Keith Pompey on Twitter as well. And on his Twitter feed, he does have the story right there, so you guys can click on that and give it a read. Keith Pompey, Inquirer.com. Always great catching up with you, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, my man.
Absolutely. Keith Pompey joining us on the Rothman Orthopedics guest. My thanks, Keith Pompey, for stopping by the program. Here's how that went down, by the way. So I was texting with Keith earlier in the day yesterday, and I said, "Hey, Keith, can I get you on the show? I'd love to talk about the Sixers, the draft, all that fun stuff." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, it's going to be a little tight for me tonight, but I can do it. Probably 9:30. I was like, "Yeah, let's party." So I like to follow up with guests just to make sure that they're still available, if there's a more convenient time for them. I like to be hospitable. They're doing me the favor. They're coming on the program, right? And he when I texted him a follow-up at like 7:50, I text him, and then I go on Twitter, and literally 2 minutes before I texted him, he dropped the article about Tobias Harris. I was like, oh, good golly. I thought he's going to be too busy. He's not going to be able to come on now, but this is perfect if I can get him. And sure enough, we were able to get him. So we had already had him booked, and then that story came out about Tobias Harris. And I'll tell you this right now. I am curious to see I'm curious to see how it all works under Nick Nurse, but two things in particular. I think the one obvious thing is Joel Embiid. The second obvious thing is James Harden. Those are the two players that I think we're most curious as to how they perform and how they play under Nick Nurse. But here's what we know. Those two players, now assuming James Harden's back, those two players are going to be those two players. Those two players are going to be the marquee key components of this team going forward. But what I'm curious about is how Tyrese Maxey develops under Nick Nurse. I've been saying that since jump. And then I'm also curious to see what you get out of Tobias Harris and all this. one of the things, like, I hate to use the term motion because that's a specific term used in basketball when you describe offenses, like we're going to run our normal motion offense, that kind of thing. And it's a high school type of thing. Okay, it's a college type of thing. It's not necessarily an NBA type of thing. To say the term motion in the NBA is like belittling. Okay, but I am curious to see the fluidity of the offense that the Sixers run under Nick Nurse. I am curious to see what Tobias Harris's role is in Nick Nurse's offense. As Keith Pompey said, a lot of times, offensively speaking, in half-court sets especially, Tobias Harris disappears in the corner way too often for a near-max contract type of guy. I would love to see how this ball moves in Nick Nurse's offense with these players. This could be the best brand of basketball that we have seen, offensively speaking, from the Sixers. Defensively speaking, I think they're going to try some things, but I don't know how much better than I still think it's going to be PJ Tucker, Joel Embiid running the defensive show, and I'm crossing my fingers for a step forward in Tyrese Maxey's defensive game. That's what I'll be hoping for. But offensively speaking, I'm really curious to see how this ball moves in half-court sets. We all know the Sixers can run. We know Tyrese Maxey can run. I know Tobias Harris can run. But in half-court sets, when James Harden is walking the ball up the floor and everyone's in their spot, I want to see how these guys move. I want to see the motion. I want to see the fluidity to the offense. What I want to see is Joel Embiid flash, another high school word. I want to see Joel Embiid flash to the top of the key. I want to see Joel Embiid flash to the foul line or the elbow. And while he's doing that, Tobias Harris is not just standing there in the corner, but he's breaking it to the basket. I want to see all that motion that we saw sparingly in the Doc Rivers era. I want to see a little bit of that more. I want to see more of that in the Nick Nurse era and see how that helps everybody. Just some basic basketball, basic fundamental basketball that I think Nick Nurse can use in order to make these guys better. And let's not forget what our friend Rich Hoffman, who joined us a couple of weeks ago, and by the way, total BS that Rich was one of the unfortunate cuts of The Athletic. Does a phenomenal job. I love talking to Rich Hoffman. And when he came on the show, he talked about how Nick Nurse, and in his article, great article that he wrote about how Nick Nurse would go to very basic forms of basketball, especially on the defensive end of things, when he was defending against the Golden State Warriors in their championship. Yes, they didn't have Kevin Durant. I understand. But the idea of going a box and one, like, what? You don't do that at the NBA level. Not even a lot. That's the equivalent of in baseball, every time there was a shift, when there used to be a shift, you bunt. Like, you don't do that. You don't take the bat out of your own hands and only settle for maybe a single. Well, you did it, and it worked. But you don't do that in the NBA. He did it, and it worked. So I'm really curious to see all these questions get answered when it comes to Nick Nurse and what he's going to do with this team. And one of the people I'm really curious about is Tobias Harris. Because, again, I don't think Tobias Harris has all of a sudden become this mediocre player. I think he's asked to play a mediocre role, and I think he plays that role well. And if you notice, if you don't have Tyrese Maxey, if you don't have James Harden, you don't have Joel Embiid, you don't have any one of the big three out there, then Tobias Harris steps up and plays a much better brand of basketball. He's a better scorer. He's a better rebounder. He's always a good defender. Not great, but good. More than serviceable. And I'm curious to see if he can get that kind of output from Tobias Harris on a more consistent basis, especially when it comes to numbers, especially when it comes to offensive production. And I want to see, in doing so, with using more of that motion, if you will, I want to see if that makes Joel Embiid a better facilitator. I want to see if that makes Joel Embiid, yes, more like Nikola Jokic. Not Nikola Jokic in terms of a triple-double every night with assists galore, but just a guy that could get you on average, 7, 6, 8 assists a game. It's going to be a very different brand of basketball. I'm hoping that it makes this a team a better team, the Sixers team a better squad. When it comes to Nick Nurse and James Harden and Joel Embiid, and whether or not you have the gap year without James Harden, or whether or not you bring back James Harden, it is an interesting thing that I just can't get past the second round of the playoffs mentally. A lot of things have to fall into place for them to maybe not draw the Celtics. And the Celtics just obviously had that blockbuster trade last night where they get Kristaps Porzingis. But, man, if the Sixers can figure out how to make all this work to a much better level and much more elite level. I will obviously be surprised. I'll be pleasantly surprised. I'll be rooting for it. But when it comes down to it, you still have Joel Embiid and James Harden. The thing we're crossing our fingers for is that you'll have a version of James Harden and Joel Embiid under Nick Nurse. And maybe that's the best basketball we'll see from them in terms of winning a championship. It might not be the most assists in the NBA. It might not be the MVP of the NBA. It certainly might not be a scoring leader in the NBA when it comes to Joel Embiid. But maybe it'll be the most championship level, the closest thing to a championship level of basketball that this team has ever played. That's what I'm going to be hoping for. Because I'm not rooting for MVPs. I'm not rooting for assist titles. Okay? I'm not looking at that. I want to know whether or not this team is going to win a championship. We've moved past the idea of just making it out of the second round. We've been past that for a while now. We're now at the point of you got to win a championship. That's what you got to do. You don't have to. This isn't about taking steps forward. When you have a 33, 34-year-old, soon to be 30-year-old, leading your team in James Harden and Joel Embiid, respectively, when you have those two guys on your squad, it's not about growing anymore. It's about now. So it's not just about a second round and, they got a second round. The conference finals. No, it's about winning a championship. And throughout this entire season, as I've told you, I'm going to be treating 82 games as if it's preseason leading up to the playoffs. That's how I felt about it for the majority of last year. That's certainly how I feel about it now. Are they good enough? Are they good enough to win the playoffs? Are they good enough to make it to a championship? Are they good enough to win that championship? It's not just about, can they get past that second round of the playoffs, the daunting second round of the playoffs? Not even close. Can they win? Nick Nurse is going to be your biggest free agent signing of this offseason. The only other thing they could do in this offseason to change this roster dramatically, the roster, not the coaching staff, but the roster, is trading Tobias Harris. And I don't think they're doing that. I think the Sixers are running it back with what they have, including Tobias Harris, and they're going to evaluate in the early goings of the season how it's coming together. And then I think before the NBA trade deadline, they'll make a significant move. And I don't mean, 5 minutes before we're getting Woj tweets or we're getting Keith Pompey tweets saying what the Sixers are doing. I mean, a month before, month and a half before, as I told you yesterday, similar to the Jimmy Butler deal. I think they'll know what they have after training camp, after the first month of the season. They'll know what they have, and they'll know what they need to do with it. And they'll want as much time as possible to change over the roster and get these players used to each other. They'll want as much time as possible to be able to do that. And I don't think they're going to wait for the trade deadline to make any significant move. I think if they're going to make a significant move next year, it's going to be in the early goings of the season, way before the trade deadline. Let me tell you about the great people at Manscaped, the leader in below-the-waist grooming. Join 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with their skin-safe technology that helps them reduce the risk of nicks so you can manscape with confidence and comfort. So go to manscaped.com. That's manscaped.com. And make sure you check it out. They have their best hygiene bundle yet, their Platinum Package 4.0, which includes their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, as well as their Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer. And yes, they do come with skin-safe technology that helps you reduce the risk of nicks so you can manscape with confidence and comfort. So check out manscaped.com. Manscaped.com. How about the amazing people at Freestone Farm CBD, FreestoneFarmCBD.com. You'll love their tropical tasting Bayox that clocks into the chart-topping 24.1%, and Super CBD, which is half Hindu, Kush, and 21%. Genetics of these guys are off the charts. So try Freestone Farm CBD at FreestoneFarmCBD.com. How about PHL Sports Nation, Philadelphia Sports Nation, enhancing your Philadelphia sports fan experience across all social media and blogs. That's PHLSportsStation.com. Let's get to the chat check and see how you guys are doing on this fine morning. Let's start it off on the Farzy Show YouTube channel. Oh, popping. You guys are popping. A says, good morning, everyone. Good morning, A. I have absolutely no faith in the Sixers organization. Okay. I can see why. April. Morning, April. April, I did look at that fishing story you sent me. I'm still digesting. I'm still trying to understand what the hell's going on there. Basically, this fishing team caught a marlin, and it was a record marlin that would have won like $3.25 million for these people. And it unfortunately was like a bite was taken out of it by a shark, so it didn't officially count. Something crazy. But they were disqualified after thinking they won. I'll get more into it probably tomorrow. That's like a Friday story, but I wanted to let you know that I at least saw it. I skimmed it. Sean Kilray, what's going on? Sean Kilray, I see Sidney Brown and Reed Blankenship doing, I assume you're saying big things. They are hungry, and hungry dogs run faster. There you go, Sean. Boop. PJ, I didn't get to watch baseball yesterday. I'm in shambles. You know what does suck? And I'm with you, PJ. And I say this, though, I think the worst day in sports, the worst day of the year, is the day after opening day. That is the worst. Because you ramp yourself up, you're excited that your team's coming, in our case, north from Florida to get their season underway, and you're like, baseball's every day. I miss it so much. It's amazing. I love it. And then you watch them, and then they're not there. they're not there the next day for the rain out, built-in rain out day. Okay, and I'm like, such a letdown. And yesterday was kind of like that, because especially with this series against the Braves. Calm like Tom Bombadil. Okay. How you doing? Good morning. Good morning to you. The family is looking maybe to travel to New Zealand and see Hobbit Land. Have you ever traveled to Europe? Well, or etc. Senor Farzy. First off, I find it hilarious. You're going to New Zealand and you're asking me about Europe. But if you're saying if I've ever traveled, yes, I've done my fair share of traveling. I haven't made it to New Zealand. I have not made it to Australia yet. I'd love to go. I've been to Europe a number of times, and I've been to Peru. I've been to South America once. Technically, I was in Ecuador, but I was only at the airport. So does that even count? But yes, I've been to, where have I been now? Ireland, Germany, England, Italy, Amsterdam. Maybe that's it. And Peru. Oh, I've been to Canada, if you ever heard of that. But yeah, anyway. Not made it to New Zealand. My buddy, Jamie Lynch, as a matter of fact. He lived in Australia for 6 months? I think he did 6 months in Australia. But anyway, yeah, enjoy. Calm like Tom Bombadil. Thanks for all the great content. Oh, that's very nice of you. Appreciate you too. Thank you, Calm. Appreciate it. April, PJ, I felt the same way about baseball. It's a sad day when you know of baseball. I agree. April, I hope Nurse can help them, but if Harden stays, I don't think anything is going to actually change. You know what, April? I agree. But when I try to argue the other side of it, like, look, I don't. I want to believe that Nick Nurse is going to be the game changer in all of this. I want to believe that he is going to make this team a true championship contender. I don't think it's going to happen with the same core. I don't think it's going to happen with James Harden here. I would have more faith over the next 3 years, the Sixers competing for a championship, if they did take this one gap year and just went with what they had and invested elsewhere, not in James Harden, but invested elsewhere. I would have a lot more confidence in this Sixers team winning a championship. But now it feels like the eggs are all in the James Harden basket, and I don't think that's a good basket to be in. And I would love for Nick Nurse to be the guy that changes it, but I don't think he's the guy. But as far as what you're saying about James Harden, no, I totally agree. Now, the only thing that makes me grasp at straws of optimism here is the idea that we haven't seen or haven't heard the orchestra with Nick Nurse as the conductor. We haven't heard the beat yet. We know the instruments. We know the sound the instruments make. Maybe we find a different way to play them. That's what I'm hoping for when it comes to Nick Nurse. Mia Sanchez, morning all. Phils didn't lose nor blow an opportunity yesterday. Also, Bebe, who I saw Tuesday night, seems to be doing a lot better as she was in Philly, though. Or as she was Philly tough. Oh, well, that's great. Mia Sanchez, he was at the Baby concert. So that's great. After she was hit in the eye with a cell phone. She fought through like a true player. Thanks everybody in the chat. You guys are great as per usual. Let's jump over to the Morning Rush brought to you by Sky Motorcars, skymotorcars.com. Aaron Nola gets the start. Hopefully this afternoon as the Phillies take on the Braves in what is supposed to be game 3 of a 3-game series. But unfortunately, as you know, they were rained out yesterday. So still waiting to see if the Phillies will get that game in today. It is a 1:05 start time. Aaron Nola still gets the start. The Braves are making a change in starter. Bryce Elder will get the start for the Braves. He's 5-1 with a 2.60 ERA. Just anybody the Braves throw out there is just spectacular. 24-year-old righty taking to the hill, 5-1 in the season with that 2.60 ERA. He's coming off a hell of a start against the Colorado Rockies. 6 innings of 1-run baseball, allowing just 4 hits. Prior to that, a bit of a hiccup for the 24-year-old righty. Prior to that, Nationals and Mets, he allowed 9 runs in those 2 starts, went at least 5 1/3 in both of those. So he's allowed a lot of runs there. But in the 2 previous starts to that, he was back to his at least 6-inning, 1-run performance. So some good stuff there. Some good stuff from Bryce Elder, who'll be getting the start against Aaron Nola today. Now, Aaron Nola has had 2 games so far this season where he's had at least 6 days rest. So he's getting an extra day of rest here. Those 2 games, those 2 games, he is 1-0 in those 2 games this year with a 4.63 ERA. And he's allowed 2 home runs in those 2 games, 6 runs in total. So I wish I could have more confidence for you when it comes to Aaron Nola, but I don't. The bottom line is I don't, unfortunately. So that sucks. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You guys are great as per usual. Tomorrow, we'll hopefully be talking about a Phillies win over the Braves. Hopefully at least a Phillies game against the Braves. Well, they'll split. Will be a 2-game series. So we'll cross our fingers for all that and more. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. This is The Farzy Show. My name is Mark Farzetta. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, all that stuff on The Farzy Show YouTube channel, as well as the Jacob Media YouTube channel as well. Jim Hyde, producer program, did a wonderful job. Be back with you guys tomorrow. See you then. Bye.